In the early days of the One-Year War, Zeon's commander units were little more than standard Zaku 1s or Zaku 2s, but with a commander antenna superglued to their head. While this did give them better communication abilities and also increased their coolness by up to 3 times, it did little else. One of the more customized examples of this was Dozle Zabi's custom Zaku II F-type. On the outside, this thing stood out quite a bit from the regular F-type. It had a golden trim, unique commander antennas, spikes on the hands, and twin shoulder spike shields that had 4 spikes instead of 3. On the inside though, the only difference was that the cockpit had been enlarged to fit Dozle's large frame. And even though Dozle wasn't supposed to take this machine out to the front lines, he would do so anyways, but usually under the guise of frontline inspections.
We're almost in the enemy's sights, Your Excellency. Please be careful.
I've come this far to observe the enemy. There's nothing to worry about if you were here.
Being subtle never was Dozle's strong point. It is often said that Dozle would also only use a custom-made large heat hawk to increase the morale of his troops during these outings, but there have been instances of him using standard Zaku weaponry too. The eventual fate of the Zaku also varies from source to source. According to some, it just sat in a Solomon hangar where it was then eventually destroyed during the famous Battle of Solomon, but according to others, the mobile suit went down fighting during the Federation's Operation Antares, one of the earlier attempts by the Federation to capture Solomon. But now back to the beginning of the war, where it wouldn't be long before high-performance dedicated commander-type Zakus became a thing. Some by design and some due to circumstances. The most famous commander unit is of course the Zaku II S-type, a machine popularized by ace pilots like Char, although this wasn't actually the first one. That honor goes to the Zaku II FS-type, a machine whose most distinctive visual feature was without a doubt the 4 30mm Vulcan guns on its head, a feature that was quite a rarity in Zeon machines of the time. However, despite looking nice, they mainly served for suppression as they lacked a punch to do any real damage. In addition to this, their ammo capacity was also rather small, allowing for only 10 seconds of continuous fire. Overall, their effect and usefulness was less than expected, and might have even played a role as to why Zeon units typically lacked head-mounted Vulcan guns. However, the rest of this machine was significantly more deadly. Most FS types were hand-picked F-types that were customized to have better close combat performance, and also received a new backpack that would serve as an inspiration for the later S-type's backpack. Now, because the FS was developed in extremely small numbers and was also given to high-ranking officers, it's difficult to say what the standard equipment for the FS type was, if it even had any to begin with. From the examples we have, it would seem that almost every FS type was customized specifically for its pilot. For example, Garma Zabi's unit would have a very ornate heat hawk, Shin Matsunaga had a large heat hawk, and Eric Manfield's unit only had 2 Vulcan guns instead of 4. These customizations and varying weapon loadouts could also explain why, according to some sources, the Vulcan guns were 40mm instead of 30. It wouldn't surprise me if some aces requested the underperforming 30mm Vulcans to be upgunned to 40mm ones. And now, let's have a closer look at some of those custom units. The most famous one is without a doubt the green and orange one used by Zeon's Earth Attack Force commander Garma Zabi. It is sometimes listed as mostly a ceremonial unit, with Garma using his custom DOP instead, but it is also said that he used this Zaku during the first Earth drop operation. Whatever the case might be, because it was so rarely used, his Zaku would survive the war and was later even displayed at New York City's 10th anniversary exhibition of their liberation. Eric Manfield's Grey FS-type then was a less fortunate machine. Due to being one of the earliest FS-types around, it suffered frequent engine troubles, forcing Mansfield to use a spare F-type instead. Because of this, he would move over to the Zaku II high mobility type as soon as possible. Also, the reason that his FS-type only had 2 Vulcan guns was so that more space was available for the ammo. The highest performing FS-type then was that of Shin Matsunaga, a unit that was significantly luckier than that of Mansfield. The unit had an excellent track record and would be upgraded on numerous occasions by Matsunaga to push the machine to its absolute limits. And then finally we have Vish Donahue Zaku, one of the more customized FS types out there. It had 2 shoulder spike shields, a goof shield, and extra thrusters on the legs, combined with rocket boosters on the backpack for hit and run tactics. Now, despite us knowing about these units, it's important to keep in mind that the amount of combat they saw as a whole was still rather limited. Even to the point that, earlier on, people were actively questioning whether or not these units saw any combat at all. Something that would not be a problem with Zeon's main commander machine, the MS-06S Zaku II Commander type. With the F-type getting on in age and various Zeon Ace pilots having already pushed them and their FS types to their absolute limits, the Zeon top brass realized that they needed something more powerful. At the time, the high mobility R-type was also in development and was even being considered to fill this role. However, since its inception, many upgrades had been made to the design, making mass production a very costly affair. So instead, it was decided to make a more middle-of-the-road solution. A unit that would keep the spirit of the high mobility type, but was made within the confines of the F-type. And so the MS-06S was born, a unit with significantly higher performance, while still sharing 80% of its parts with the F-type, and another 10% that could be substituted if need be. A true godsend for mechanics and pilots alike. The biggest changes were a more powerful reactor, giving it 30% higher speeds, extra vernier thrusters, an improved mono-eye sensor, improved actuators, and of course a commander antenna. Most units would use the standard MC114H antenna, but there were quite a few different ones available. There was the F12BZ type, better known as the stabilizer type, the G8HSD type, the MH8512 type, the A01B type, and the V12SP type, also better known as the Rabbit type. However, all of these performance upgrades didn't come without their drawbacks either, and there was a very good reason why these units were only handed out to ace pilots. Compared to the regular F-type, the S-type was much harder to control, even to such a degree that it was said that if a regular pilot were to use an S-type, his performance would be lower than if he were to use an F-type. Another often cited downside is that compared to the F-type, the S-type had a much higher fuel consumption, due to the stronger reactor and also extra vernier thrusters. Even though the fuel capacity was increased by 8%, this still meant a lower operating time if the pilot used the S-type at full performance. And talking about the F-types versus the S-types, most sources will link the development of the S-type to the F-type, but there are also some that link it back to the C-type, and one of my favorite books, the Master Archive MSV Ace Pilot Log, even links it all the way back to the A-type. Based on Elliot Rem's feedback of the A-type, a tentative plan was drawn up for the S-type, which was then put on the back burner in favor of mass producing the C-types, and then again with the F-types. Naturally, the specs for this proposed S-type would then also evolve with each iteration, eventually becoming the S-type that we now all know and love. Another interesting proposal from the book then was that it was also possible that the S-types and FS-types were deployed earlier than we might think, but were labeled as F-types due to secrecy. One such example was Johnny Raiden. It is commonly said that after the Battle of Loom, he received a commander version of the F-type, that he would then use until switching to the high mobility type R2. It is now also said that before switching to the R2, he also used an S-type, meaning that he didn't use the F-type all that long before secretly switching over to the visually very similar S-type. And since we're on the topic of customizing the S-type, it seems that customizing them was largely limited to personalized color schemes and non-standard issue weapons, as opposed to some of the more elaborate custom Zakus we've seen previously in this video. A good example of this were the 3 S-types used by the Black Tri-Stars. Other than their trademark color scheme, they used an experimental double bazooka and the experimental M112 AC machine gun, a variant of the standard Zaku machine gun but with a heat bayonet. The only physical modification then was a container backpack that went over the regular backpack on Ortega's unit, and if need be, this could be ditched in mid-combat thanks to explosive bolts. Other S-types would be mostly seen with the standard 120mm Zaku machine gun and 280mm Zaku bazooka. But that is not to say that this was the case for all of them. One of the more out there custom Zaku II commander types was the MS-06LE Zaku II Yuri Korbel custom. Because its pilot was left-handed, the spike armor was changed to the right shoulder, and to maximize its speed, the shield was altogether removed. And for anyone wondering about the color scheme, this was in honor of Zeon's strongest soccer club, of which the pilot, Yuri Korbel, was a player. Another minor variant then was the MS-06S Reconnaissance Zaku II. The only difference between this unit and the regular S-type was that it was given a low visibility black paint job to make it harder to spot in space, which would be very useful for its job. These units would be used during the closing stages of the One-Year War to monitor Federation fleets and their movements. Something that was very risky, but also very important. And finally, an honorable mention goes to the MS-06 Shaku, Zaku II Shaku Yumiko custom. A machine that is 3 times cuter than a regular Zaku. Modifications include see-through armor parts, a heart-shaped backpack that also produces a heart-shaped thrust, a love fusion reactor, and a love machine gun. Yeah, I think this is the perfect unit to end this video with. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more similar content. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.